The oak-paneled courtroom in downtown Nashville was unusually crowded that morning. Rows of polished benches creaked as spectators shifted forward, eager for the kind of drama that only wealth betrayal and courtroom tension could deliver. Reporters tapped pens against notepads, photographers adjusted their lenses, and even the bailiff seemed to stand a little straighter, as if anticipating a show. Before we dive into true revenge stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. At the center of it all sat Bradley Crawford, my soon-to-be ex-husband, his confidence radiating like a neon sign. He leaned back in his chair, wearing the same smug grin I had once mistaken for charm. His custom-tailored navy suit fit him flawlessly, bought, of course, with my money. He exuded the kind of arrogance that made strangers assume he was already victorious, Your Honor. Bradley's attorney began, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. My client is entitled to half of all marital assets, including the considerable inheritance Mrs. Crawford received during their marriage. The words hit me like a punch in the chest, even though I had been expecting them. I sat at the defense table, spine rigid, palms pressed against the folder of documents Patricia, my attorney, had carefully prepared. My name is Judith Crawford. I am 45 years old. And I never imagined I would be sitting here, watching the man I once trusted with my heart attempt to steal everything my grandmother left me. The spectators leaned forward. To them, it was entertainment, a multi-million-dollar divorce case with all the makings of a scandal. But to me, it was more than numbers on paper. It was betrayal, sharpened into a weapon aimed squarely at my life's work and my family's legacy. Bradley turned his head slightly and flashed me a smile he must have thought was triumphant. That small act of arrogance burned hotter than his lawyer's demands. Once upon a time, that smile had charmed me into believing he loved me for who I was. Now it was proof that greed had been his only vow. Judge Richardson, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a reputation for cutting through nonsense, adjusted her reading glasses. Her eyes scanned the initial filings with practiced patience. For 2 decades she had presided over family court, and though she rarely betrayed emotion, I thought I caught the faintest hint of skepticism in her expression, as if she too had seen this act before. She finally looked up. Mrs. Crawford, do you have a response to these claims? The room stilled. Reporters froze, pens hovering above paper. My heart pounded, but my resolve was solid. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the point where Bradley's overconfidence would meet the wall of my preparation. Yes, Your Honor, I said, rising slowly. My voice was calm, though I felt a storm raging beneath my skin. There is indeed something the court needs to review before any division of assets can be considered. From the corner of my eye, I caught Bradley's smirk falter. He whispered something to his attorney, who looked momentarily confused. Of course he was. Bradley had never mentioned the prenuptial agreement to him, never thought he needed to. Patricia, steady and composed, rose beside me and handed a sealed manila envelope to the court clerk, who carried it to Judge Richardson. Your Honor. Patricia said, her tone firm. This is a certified copy of the prenuptial agreement executed between Mr. and Mrs. Crawford 6 weeks prior to their marriage. It was produced in discovery, but as we anticipated this morning's claims, we have prepared the full documentation for your immediate review. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even the reporters seemed to sit up straighter. Bradley's expression flickered from smugness to confusion, and then to the first hints of panic. I kept my gaze locked on him, letting him see the steadiness in my eyes. He had believed he held all the cards. He had strutted into this courtroom thinking his charm and audacity would be enough to dismantle my life. But he was about to learn that arrogance and ignorance make a dangerous combination. Judge Richardson broke the seal on the envelope and began scanning the first page. Silence blanketed the room, broken only by the soft shuffle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioning. I inhaled deeply, grounding myself in this moment. 5 years of manipulation, financial gaslighting, and emotional cruelty had led to this. The prenup, dismissed by Bradley as just a formality, was about to become his undoing. As the judge turned another page, I let the reality settle over me. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was one of those true revenge stories where preparation meets justice, where betrayal is met not with rage, but with careful, devastating precision. And as the tension mounted in that hushed courtroom, I couldn't help but wonder how many people in this room were silently cheering for the day when greed finally collapsed under its own weight. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, our listeners and viewers, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how these stories of justice resonate with people around the world. It reminds us all that betrayal and the fight for dignity is universal. For me, this was more than a fight over money. It was a fight for truth, for legacy, and for my own sense of worth. Bradley thought he was about to win the lottery at my expense. What he didn't know was that his ticket had already been voided, signed away in ink years ago. And in the hands of Judge Richardson, that document was about to dismantle his entire scheme. If you had seen me 5 years ago, you probably would have thought I had everything together. On paper, I did. I was 40 years old, running my own consulting firm in Nashville Brightville Analytics. I had carved a small but solid reputation, helping struggling businesses optimize their operations. My calendar was always full, my phone never stopped buzzing, and the numbers in my bank account told me I was doing fine. But appearances don't always reveal the truth. What no one saw was the quiet emptiness that followed me everywhere. My grandmother, my closest confidant, the woman who had practically raised me, had passed away just a year earlier. Her absence was like a constant echo in my chest. I would still catch myself reaching for the phone to call her, only to remember she wasn't there anymore. Friends tried to comfort me, but grief is a strange companion. It follows you into crowded rooms and whispers in your ear when the world thinks you've moved on. That's the version of me Bradley met. Vulnerable, lonely, successful on the outside but starving for connection on the inside. We crossed paths at a business conference in Memphis. The hotel ballroom smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee, the kind of environment I normally thrived in. I was reviewing a set of financial reports when he appeared, golden hair, perfectly styled smile, warm enough to melt ice. "Impressive," he said, glancing at the spreadsheets spread across my table. "Most people dread numbers. You look like you're having fun." I laughed lightly, caught off guard. "It's part of the job." Bradley pulled out the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. "Then you must be brilliant at it." Honestly, I've never met anyone who makes analytics look this elegant. It was a line, of course, but I didn't recognize it as one back then. I was so used to men either being intimidated by my career or uninterested in it altogether. Bradley seemed fascinated. He asked about my clients, my strategies, even the software I used. He leaned in, nodding thoughtfully at every answer, as if each word I spoke was worth storing away. That kind of attention felt intoxicating. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt seen. The conference turned into dinners, and dinners into long weekend calls. Bradley always seemed available, always eager to remind me I wasn't alone. He had a knack for timing texts when I felt low compliments, when I looked tired, laughter, when I needed it most. "Life's too short to live in spreadsheets," he told me one evening after a gala dinner. "You deserve to be spoiled." I remember blushing, something I hadn't done since college. Looking back, I can see the pattern. He wasn't just listening, he was calculating. Every story I shared about my grandmother, every mention of my modest success, every hesitation I revealed about dating at 40, he stored it all like ammunition. To me, it felt like intimacy. To him, it was reconnaissance. Within months, he swept me into a whirlwind of attention I didn't realize I had been craving. Flowers appeared at my office. He booked last-minute trips to New Orleans or Charleston, insisting I needed a break. He seemed to have money to burn, even though I knew his job as a sales manager at a pharmaceutical company shouldn't have covered half of what he was spending. "Don't worry about it," he'd say, whenever I questioned the extravagance. I believe in investing in the people I care about. And I believed him. Because when you've spent so long carrying the weight of your own world, the idea that someone else might want to share the load feels irresistible. My grandmother had always warned me, beware of men who move too fast. But grief has a way of muting old wisdom. At the time, Bradley felt like a gift from the universe, proof that maybe love really did arrive when you least expected it. By the time he proposed just 8 months after we met, I was still caught in that haze of gratitude and flattery. He arranged a private dinner on a riverboat complete with a string quartet and a ring that sparkled under the Tennessee moonlight. I remember my heart pounding as he knelt before me, the entire room watching. "Life's too short to wait, Judith," he said, holding out that ring like a promise. "I know what I want, and I want you." Everyone applauded when I whispered yes. In that moment, I thought I had found a man who valued me, who cherished both my strengths and my scars. What I didn't realize was that Bradley wasn't offering me forever. He was laying the first brick in a carefully built trap, and by the time I understood the truth, it would already be too late. The night Bradley proposed was like something out of a movie. He had rented a private riverboat on the Cumberland, its deck lined with lanterns that glowed against the dark water. A string quartet played softly in the background, their notes drifting over the current like whispers. I remember the scent of roses, dozens of them filling the air with sweetness. Guests and staff stood at a polite distance, but I felt as if the entire world had narrowed to just him and me. Bradley held my hands as though they were the most precious things he had ever touched. His eyes sparkled under the golden light, and when he dropped to one knee, time seemed to hold its breath. "Judith," he said, voice carrying with theatrical confidence, "life is too short to hesitate. I know what I want, and what I want is you. Will you marry me?" Applause rippled across the deck as the ring caught the lantern light. It was dazzling, far beyond what a pharmaceutical sales manager should have been able to afford. But in that moment, I didn't question it. I felt the eyes of strangers watching, waiting for my answer, and I whispered yes. It should have been the happiest night of my life, and in some ways it was. But the very next morning, reality returned in the form of a phone call from Patricia Holbrook, my longtime attorney and one of the few people I trusted completely. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said warmly. Then her tone sharpened, professional and steady. "Judith, we need to talk about a prenuptial agreement." The word made my stomach twist. I had always associated prenups with cynicism documents drafted by people who expected love to fail. "Patricia," I said, lowering my voice, "even though I was alone in my office, isn't that unromantic? Bradley will think I don't trust him." "Unromantic is losing your family's wealth in a divorce," she replied firmly. "You've built a business. Your grandmother's estate will eventually pass to you. It's not about love, it's about protection. Any successful woman needs it." I hesitated, replaying Bradley's smile in my head. What would he say if I asked him to sign something that essentially predicted our marriage could end? When I finally gathered the courage to bring it up over dinner, Bradley surprised me. He laughed. Actually laughed, waving his hand as if brushing away a fly. "Darling, if it makes you comfortable, of course I'll sign. I'm not marrying you for your money. I'm marrying you for you." I searched his face for any trace of resentment, but all I saw was confidence. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his wine, and added, "Love doesn't need fine print. If a stack of papers gives you peace of mind, then hand me a pen." It was disarming, too disarming. My doubts softened, and for a fleeting moment I felt foolish for ever worrying. Patricia, however, remained thorough. The agreement was drafted with meticulous detail, full financial disclosure from my side, documenting assets, income, and expected inheritance. Clause 4A, all assets owned prior to marriage remain the separate property of that party. Clause 4B, any inheritance acquired during marriage remains separate, provided it is not commingled with marital accounts. Clause 6, waiver of spousal support, no alimony regardless of income disparity. Witness signatures and notarization executed 6 weeks before the wedding date. Patricia even recommended Bradley hire his own attorney. "It strengthens the agreement," she explained. "No one can claim they didn't understand," Bradley declined. "Why would I waste money on a lawyer when I trust you?" he said with a grin. He initialed every page, joked with the notaries, and signed with a flourish. At the time, I mistook his casualness for sincerity. I thought his willingness to sign without hesitation proved his devotion. In reality, it revealed something else entirely: his arrogance. He believed he was so charming, so untouchable, that fine print could never hold him. When Patricia slid the completed document into her firm's safe, she gave me a look I'll never forget. Someday, she said, you'll be glad we did this. I smiled politely, certain she was being overly cautious. After all, Bradley had just promised me forever on a moonlit river. What could possibly go wrong? I didn't know it yet, but the ink drying on that contract wasn't just legal protection. It was the first line in the story of how Bradley's greed would destroy him, and how preparation, not passion, would ultimately save me. 18 months into our marriage, the phone call came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. I was in my office at Brightvale Analytics, knee-deep in quarterly reports, when the receptionist buzzed me. "It's from your grandmother's attorney," she said softly, as if the name itself carried weight. Even after all that time hearing the word, grandmother still tugged at something raw inside me. She had been gone for 3 years, but her absence lingered like an unfinished sentence. I picked up the phone, bracing myself. "Mrs. Crawford." The attorney's voice was calm, measured. "It's time to settle your grandmother's estate. As her sole heir, you'll be inheriting her house, her investment portfolio, her personal library of rare books, and approximately $2.8 million in managed funds." For a moment, the numbers didn't register. The words blurred into static, and I pressed the receiver closer, as though I hadn't heard correctly. $2.8 million. It was more than I had ever dreamed she would leave me. My grandmother had always lived comfortably but frugally, never flaunting her wealth. To discover the breadth of her legacy left me stunned, humbled, and suddenly very small in a world that now saw me differently. That night I told Bradley over dinner. We sat across from each other at our mahogany table, candles flickering between us. I delivered the news carefully, still weighed down by emotion. His reaction was instant. His eyes lit up, literally lit up like a child on Christmas morning. $2.8 million, he repeated the words, almost reverent. "Judith, we're rich. We." That single syllable should have set off alarm bells. Instead, I smiled weakly, trying to convince myself it was natural for a husband to feel included. Bradley pushed back his chair and began pacing the room, already calculating. "We can upgrade the house, get you a better car, maybe even buy into that new country club on the west side." "This is life-changing." The pace of his voice, the sparkle in his eyes. It wasn't the joy of shared security. It was hunger. "I don't think we should rush into anything," I said cautiously. "It's still new, and I want to keep the funds separate. Patricia advised me to leave everything in accounts under my name only. It's safer that way." Bradley stopped pacing, forcing a laugh. "Of course, darling. Whatever you say. But let's be honest, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's marriage." I nodded, but a knot had already formed in my stomach. Over the next few weeks, subtle changes began to creep into our lives. Bradley, who had once prided himself on being a hard-working sales manager, announced that he wanted to take a break from the corporate grind. "You don't need me to bring home a paycheck," he said breezily. "This gives me time to explore new opportunities, support you, and manage our lifestyle." Manage our lifestyle. The phrasing stayed with me like a splinter. He started spending freely, first a luxury sedan for networking purposes, then a $30,000 investment into a friend's restaurant that collapsed within the year. Membership fees for an exclusive golf club appeared on our bank statements, followed by receipts from lavish vacations I hadn't agreed to. Each time I questioned him, Bradley leaned on the same refrain. "We're partners, Judith." Couples trust each other with financial decisions. Don't you trust me? It was gaslighting disguised as intimacy. The truth was, I had kept my grandmother's funds in separate accounts, untouched and unmingled, just as Patricia had advised. What Bradley spent came from my regular income and credit lines money that he framed as ours but drained like it was his alone. I began to see the outlines of the man beneath the charm. This wasn't excitement, it was entitlement. Bradley didn't view my inheritance as a gift meant to secure my future. He saw it as a jackpot he had won by marrying me. One night, while sipping bourbon on our back patio, he spoke with a carelessness that chilled me. "Do you realize how lucky you are that I came along when I did? Before me, you were just a lonely workaholic with nothing to spend that money on. Now you've got someone who knows how to enjoy life. We're a team. You need me." I forced a smile, but deep down something shifted. My grandmother had once told me, "Money doesn't change people, it reveals them." And Bradley was revealing himself more, with each passing day. I didn't yet know how far his greed would push him. But sitting there in the glow of the porch light, hearing him rewrite my life as though he had rescued me from myself, I understood one thing clearly. This inheritance wasn't just a blessing. It was the match that would ignite the truth. At first, the changes seemed subtle, almost harmless. Bradley started bringing home expensive bottles of wine, the kind I never would have purchased myself. He insisted on dining at upscale restaurants 3 or 4 nights a week, slipping the receipts into a drawer as if they were nothing more than grocery lists. When I raised an eyebrow, he smiled that familiar smile and said, "We can afford it now, Judith. Stop living like you're still counting pennies." The problem wasn't just the money, it was the shift in language. We can afford it. We're rich. Our money. Words that blended my grandmother's legacy into his identity, as though marriage had magically transformed separate property into a communal wallet. Then came the car, a sleek imported sedan with leather seats and chrome wheels that gleamed under the Tennessee sun. "It's for networking," he explained, tossing me the keys as though I should be impressed. "A man in my position has to look successful if he wants to attract opportunities." I stared at the paperwork. The loan alone was outrageous, but the down payment had come directly from a joint credit card he had applied for in both our names. "You didn't even ask me," I said quietly. Bradley leaned back against the hood, grinning like a boy showing off a new toy. "Judith, you worry too much. Couples make decisions together, and this decision benefits us both. Trust me, appearances matter." That phrase, "trust me," became his shield. Every time I questioned a purchase, he turned it back on me, painting my concern as paranoia. When I pointed out the $30,000 he funneled into a friend's restaurant venture without so much as a conversation, he laughed. "You're brilliant with spreadsheets, darling, but not everything in life can be calculated. Sometimes you have to take risks, and when it pays off, we'll both enjoy it." The restaurant folded within a year. $30,000 gone, and Bradley shrugged it off like loose change. He joined an exclusive country club, bragging to anyone who would listen that we were investors. We were building an empire. We were the kind of couple others should envy. He strutted through the clubhouse with his new golf clubs, the membership fees quietly hitting my accounts. Vacations followed trips to Aspen, Cancun, the Bahamas, all booked without consulting me. "Surprises keep marriage exciting," he said when I confronted him. "Besides, it's not like you were going to take time off for yourself. I'm doing you a favor." I felt the walls of my life closing in. My grandmother's inheritance was still untouched. In a separate account, Patricia had drilled that discipline into me, but Bradley was draining everything else. My income paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and still he acted as though my reluctance to indulge his whims made me stingy. One evening, after I suggested we rein in the spending, he slammed his glass onto the counter so hard it cracked. "Do you hear yourself? You sound like some miser counting pennies in a dark room. What good is money if you don't enjoy it?" I married a woman, not a calculator. The words sliced deeper than he realized. I had always prided myself on my financial discipline, the very skill that built my business. To hear him twist it into an insult felt like betrayal on a level I couldn't quite name. But that was Bradley's gift, turning my strengths into flaws whenever they threatened his control. If I resisted, I was cold, frugal, ungrateful. If I complied, I was finally learning to live. The debts piled quietly in the background. The car loan, the country club fees, the failed restaurant credit cards maxed on designer clothes and weekend getaways. By the time I sat down one night and added the numbers, the total made my chest tighten, nearly $87,000. Bradley, of course, didn't see it as debt. "It's leverage," he told me, smugly swirling bourbon in a crystal glass. "Every wealthy man uses leverage. That's how you get ahead." I looked at him across the room, at the man who had once convinced me I wasn't alone, and realized with a cold clarity that I had married a parasite. He wasn't building a future with me, he was bleeding one out of me. And the more I resisted, the more he tightened his grip, gaslighting me into questioning my own instincts. It was the beginning of the storm, and though I didn't know it yet, Bradley was already plotting how to turn my grandmother's fortune, the one thing still out of his reach, into the prize he thought he deserved. The first time I overheard Bradley twisting my inheritance into our inheritance, we were at the country club. He was surrounded by men in tailored suits, drinks in hand, their laughter echoing off marble walls and glass chandeliers. I had arrived late, still in my work clothes, hoping to slip in unnoticed. Instead, I caught the tail end of his story. And when Judith's grandmother passed, it became family money. We decided it was time to live the way we were meant to. No more limits, no more scrimping. The group erupted in approving chuckles. Someone clapped him on the back. Smart man. Marry well, live well. I froze, a bitter taste rising in my throat. Family money I had kept every cent of my grandmother's estate in a separate account, untouched and legally protected. Bradley knew that, yet here he was parading it as if it were his personal windfall. When he saw me, he smiled broadly, waving me over as though I were a trophy to validate his story. Here she is, the woman who made it all possible. I forced a polite smile, but inside I was burning. That night, after the last guest left and the house was silent, I confronted him. "Why did you say the inheritance was family money? You know it's not. It's separate. Patricia made that very clear." Bradley leaned against the kitchen counter, loosening his tie with exaggerated ease. "Judith, don't be so literal. People don't care about legal definitions. They care about image, and the image of us being wealthy together makes us stronger as a couple." "Stronger," I snapped. "Or does it just make you look richer?" He smirked, unbothered by the accusation. "What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Isn't that what marriage means? You should be proud people see us as a power couple." I wanted to scream, to shake him until the truth sank in. Instead, I whispered, "It's not your money, Bradley. It never was." His face hardened, and for the first time the charm cracked. "You act like it's some big secret that I married up. Everyone knows it. Without me, you'd still be a lonely workaholic with no idea how to enjoy life." The words landed like a slap, a grain of truth buried in cruelty that had always been his strategy. Take my vulnerabilities, twist them, and throw them back at me until I doubted myself. But this time something inside me shifted. Instead of shrinking, I studied him in the dim kitchen light, the expensive watch on his wrist, the smug tilt of his chin, the entitlement radiating from every gesture. And I saw him clearly, not as a partner, not as a husband, but as a man who had built his identity on my name, my earnings, and my grandmother's legacy. Over the following weeks, the pattern worsened. At social gatherings, he introduced himself as an investor, claiming that we had diversified into restaurants, real estate, and even tech startups. He told people the fortune was ours, that together we had secured a lifestyle most could only dream of. Each lie spread like ivy, wrapping tighter around my reputation. People began to look at me not as Judith, the businesswoman who built a consulting firm from scratch, but as the woman who had married into money, as though I hadn't earned a single cent myself. The worst part, Bradley thrived on it. He preened under the admiration, collecting compliments like trophies. Every time someone congratulated him, he puffed his chest a little higher, as if my grandmother's careful planning had been his triumph. At home, the tension thickened. When I challenged him, he grew defensive, even cruel. "You're ungrateful," he accused one night. "Do you realize how many women would kill for a husband who elevates them socially? You should thank me." I stared at him across the room, my voice low but steady. "I don't need you to elevate me. I had a life before you. A successful one." His laugh was cold. A life maybe, but not a lifestyle. That was the moment the final piece clicked into place. He had never seen me as a partner. He had seen me as a ticket and access pass to a world he couldn't have entered on his own. My grandmother's words came back to me like a whisper from the grave. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. Bradley had been revealed. And as much as it broke my heart to admit it, I knew the man I had married no longer existed, if he ever had at all. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening, long after Bradley had gone to bed. I sat alone in my office, the soft glow of my laptop screen casting shadows across the bookshelves my grandmother once filled with wisdom and history. I was sorting through invoices when an unfamiliar ping echoed from our shared home computer in the corner, a sound I hadn't heard before. Curiosity tugged at me. Bradley rarely used that desktop. He preferred his phone always glued to his hand. But when I clicked over, a notification popped up, a newly received email. The subject line froze my blood. Divorce strategy, maximizing asset claims. My hand trembled as I opened it. Inside were several messages between Bradley and a lawyer I didn't recognize. They weren't just discussing separation, they were plotting. One email read, "Judith inherited during the marriage, so half is marital property. We'll argue her lifestyle improvements prove commingling. Emotional support and career sacrifices will strengthen your claim for at least 50%, maybe more, if we push alimony." Another message from Bradley himself. "She doesn't pay attention. She trusts me. Timing will be everything. If we file first, she'll be caught off guard." Caught off guard. Those words sliced deep. All the nights I'd stayed up working all the mornings, I carried the weight of our household while he slept in. He had been preparing to gut me like a careless opponent. I sank into the chair, my chest tight, my mind racing. For months, I had tried to rationalize his behavior. Maybe he just didn't understand boundaries. Maybe he was reckless, but not malicious. But here, it was black and white on the screen, intent, calculation, betrayal laid bare. For a long moment, I stared at the rain streaking down the window, letting the truth sink in. Bradley had never been my partner. He was a thief in a tailored suit, patient enough to wait until he thought the jackpot was ripe for the taking, but he had underestimated me. The next morning, I called Patricia. My voice shook at first, but steadied as I laid out everything I had discovered. She listened in silence, occasionally jotting notes, her face hardening with each detail. "Judith," she said finally, "you can't wait for him to strike. If he's planning to file first, we need to take control of the narrative. You file before he does. You decide the timeline." Her words lit a fire in me. For too long I had been reacting, defending, doubting my instincts. Now it was my turn to act. Together we began preparing. Patricia pulled the prenuptial agreement from her files, the very document Bradley had once signed with a careless laugh. She reviewed every clause, highlighting the protections, my premarital assets, my business, and most importantly, my grandmother's inheritance. "His lawyer will claim fraud, duress, or unconscionability," Patricia warned. "They'll argue he didn't understand. But this agreement is airtight, signed 6 weeks before the wedding, notarized full disclosures. He even waived independent counsel. There's no loophole." We gathered evidence bank statements showing I had kept the inheritance separate receipts, proving Bradley's reckless spending copies of the debts he had racked up in his name alone. Patricia organized it into a meticulous file, a fortress of paper and ink that told the truth. For the first time in months, I felt clarity. The fear that had clouded me began to burn away, replaced by a resolve as sharp as glass. That night, Bradley swaggered into the house, humming to himself, carrying a new set of golf clubs. He kissed my cheek absently, poured himself a drink, and boasted about a big meeting he had coming up. Watching him, I almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of the knowledge he had no idea what was coming. While he fantasized about a courtroom victory, I was already building the case that would expose him. Filing first wasn't just a legal tactic, it was a declaration. I would no longer play the role of the unsuspecting wife, waiting to be blindsided. This was my story, my grandmother's legacy, and I would not let Bradley rewrite it. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against the roof, I whispered to myself, a promise he thinks he's trapping me. But tomorrow the trap closes on him. And when the day came, he would discover that the woman he had underestimated was the one who had prepared all along. Patricia's office smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place where every detail seemed purposeful. Heavy case files lined the walls, their spines labeled with neat precision. I sat across from her mahogany desk, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "This isn't just about defense," Judith, Patricia said, sliding a stack of documents toward me. Her tone was calm but edged with steel. "We're building an offensive strategy. Bradley thinks he's playing chess, but he's still moving checkers. By the time he realizes it, the game will already be over." She opened the first binder, its pages neatly tabbed and color-coded. Inside was the prenuptial agreement, 5 years old, but as crisp as the day we signed it. Each clause had been highlighted, annotated, and cross-referenced with state law. "Clause 4B is your cornerstone," Patricia explained. "Inheritance remains separate property if it's not commingled. You followed that to the letter, separate accounts. No joint titles, no shared investments. He has nothing to stand on." I nodded, a flicker of pride stirring in my chest. For once, my meticulous nature wasn't a flaw Bradley could mock. It was my shield. The second binder contained financial records, statements, receipts, copies of checks. Patricia had combed through every line item, building a clear picture of Bradley's recklessness. Luxury car loan, country club membership, failed restaurant investment, credit card charges at boutiques and resorts, all in his name. She tapped the page firmly. That debt follows him, not you. A third binder cataloged my own contributions, my salary covering the mortgage, utilities, and household expenses. You maintain the household from your income, not the inheritance. That distinction matters. The court will see you as responsible, him as irresponsible. Patricia leaned back, folding her hands. Now we anticipate his tactics. He'll claim fraud, that you misled him about the prenup. He'll claim duress, that he was pressured into signing. Or he'll argue unconscionability, that the agreement is unfair given your wealth disparity. But she opened a folder marked Notary and Witness Statements and slid it toward me. We have sworn affidavits confirming he signed willingly after being offered independent counsel and with full financial disclosure. He initialed every page. There's no wiggle room. Her confidence steadied me. For months, I had felt like a victim of Bradley's manipulation, cornered by his lies. But here, surrounded by binders and strategy, I felt something shift. I wasn't prey anymore. I was prepared. What about his lawyer, I asked. The one from those emails. Patricia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. I've checked his filings. Sloppy work. He submitted claims for marital assets but never requested discovery on prenuptial agreements, which means either Bradley lied to him or he didn't do his homework. Either way, we'll catch them both off guard. The thought almost made me laugh. Bradley, so sure of his brilliance, hadn't even told his own attorney about the contract that doomed him. Patricia closed the last binder and looked me squarely in the eye. When we walk into that courtroom, we won't just defend. We'll dismantle his credibility. The judge will see him for what he is, a man who tried to gamble with greed and lost. I exhaled slowly, the weight in my chest loosening. For so long, I thought I was the one at risk, I admitted. But he's the one standing on quicksand. And you, Patricia said firmly, are standing on bedrock. We finalized the timeline that afternoon. Patricia would file motions highlighting the prenup's validity, accompanied by the financial records proving my discipline and his recklessness. She rehearsed questions with me, preparing for every possible angle Bradley's attorney might attempt. "What if I get nervous?" I asked quietly. "You will," she said without hesitation. "That's natural. But nerves don't matter when the facts are on your side. Remember, this isn't just your fight. It's your grandmother's legacy. You're not just protecting yourself, you're honoring her." Her words struck deep. I thought of my grandmother's voice, the countless evenings she had reminded me that strength didn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it meant being patient, being prepared, and letting the truth do the work. When I left Patricia's office, the sky over Nashville was clearing after a storm. Puddles glistened on the sidewalks, reflecting the city lights like fragments of shattered glass. For the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped. I felt armed. Bradley thought he was marching toward victory. What he didn't know was that every step brought him closer to the edge of a cliff. And I was ready to let him fall. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps buzzed like a hive. Reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras flashing at every movement. A few even called out Bradley's name as he strode up the stairs, his golden hair slicked back, his hand brushing the lapel of his tailored suit as if he were walking a red carpet premiere rather than stepping into divorce court. He loved it, every second of it. "Mr. Crawford." "Is it true you're fighting for half of your wife's inheritance?" one reporter shouted. Bradley smirked, holding his chin high. "I'm here to ensure fairness," he said smoothly. "Marriage is partnership. Partnership means sharing." I followed behind with Patricia, keeping my head down, ignoring the cameras. It wasn't my job to perform. My job was to win. Inside the courtroom, the air shifted. Dark oak paneling, high ceilings, and the faint smell of old paper created an atmosphere both solemn and suffocating. Spectators filled the benches, whispering in anticipation. A handful of journalists sat poised with notebooks ready to record the downfall of either a greedy husband or a wealthy wife. Bradley sat at the petitioner's table, his attorney Gerald Weston beside him. Gerald was thin, sharp-faced, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who thought he was about to deliver a knockout blow. "Your Honor," Gerald began as Judge Richardson took her seat. "My client seeks an equitable division of marital assets. Mrs. Crawford inherited a substantial estate during the marriage. This inheritance, while technically separate, has been functionally integrated into the marital lifestyle. Mr. Crawford left his career to support his wife emotionally and socially, enabling her to expand her business while they both enjoyed the fruits of her inheritance. He is therefore entitled to half of all assets acquired and enjoyed during the course of this marriage." The words were rehearsed, polished. Gerald spoke with the rhythm of someone who believed the outcome was already written. Across the room, Bradley leaned back, smirking at me as though I should already be defeated. His expression screamed checkmate. Judge Richardson adjusted her glasses, her face unreadable. "Continue." Gerald paced slowly, letting his voice carry. "Not only should Mr. Crawford receive half of the inheritance funds, but he is also entitled to spousal support. Mrs. Crawford earns significantly more than my client. Given that he sacrificed his career to contribute to their household, the court should award monthly alimony commensurate with the standard of living they maintain together." The gallery stirred murmurs, gasps, even a low whistle from someone in the back row. To the spectators, this was a battle of millions. To me, it was personal. Bradley, emboldened by the attention, leaned forward and whispered something to Gerald, who nodded before speaking again. "Your Honor, my client's sacrifices are clear. He gave up his position in pharmaceutical sales to be present to support and to maintain their shared lifestyle. Without his contributions, Mrs. Crawford would not have been able to run her business so effectively. She owes her success to him." I felt Patricia's hand tap mine under the table, a silent reminder to stay calm, to let the storm build. From the corner of my eye, I saw reporters scribbling furiously, no doubt crafting headlines about the millionaire wife and the betrayed husband demanding justice. Bradley basked in it, straightening his tie, throwing me sideways glances as if to say, "You should have seen this coming." Judge Richardson cleared her throat. "Mrs. Crawford, you will have an opportunity to respond. For now, we will hear the petitioner's full claims." Gerald delivered the final blow in his opening. "In conclusion, Your Honor, this marriage was a partnership in every sense. To deny Mr. Crawford his rightful share would be to dismiss the value of his sacrifices and contributions. We ask the court to award him half of all marital assets, including the inheritance funds, as well as spousal support moving forward." When he finished, the silence was heavy, broken only by the scratching of pens and the click of a reporter's camera shutter. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his smirk spreading wider, as if the victory parade had already begun. But I knew better. Patricia leaned slightly toward me, her voice no louder than a whisper. "Let him enjoy this moment. The higher he climbs, the harder he'll fall." And sitting there surrounded by whispers, cameras, and the heavy air of expectation, I realized she was right. This wasn't the end. It was only the setup, the opening act before the curtain rose on the truth. Bradley thought he had won. But the documents resting quietly in Patricia's binder told a different story, and soon the entire courtroom would hear it. The silence after Gerald's polished speech was almost theatrical. Reporters sat poised, pens hovering midair, as if waiting for the judge's gavel to fall. Bradley reclined in his chair, smugness radiating off him like heat from asphalt. He truly believed the victory was already sealed. Then Judge Richardson turned her eyes to our side of the courtroom. "Mrs. Crawford, does your counsel have a response?" Patricia rose slowly, every movement measured. She carried a thick binder in her hands, its leather cover gleaming under the fluorescent lights. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply walked to the clerk's desk, handed over a sealed manila envelope, and returned to her place with the calm of someone who knew she was holding a loaded weapon. "Your Honor." Patricia began, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut glass. "Before we address the petitioner's claims, the court needs to examine a critical document, a prenuptial agreement executed by both parties 6 weeks prior to their marriage." The room erupted in whispers. Reporters exchanged startled glances, flipping to fresh pages in their notebooks. The bailiff barked for order as the noise swelled. Across the aisle, Gerald shot up from his chair. "Your Honor, my client was not made aware of any prenuptial agreement. This is highly irregular." Judge Richardson fixed him with a stare that could have frozen fire. "Mr. Weston, if such a document exists and has been properly filed, the fault lies with your discovery process, not this court." She broke the seal on the envelope, adjusting her glasses as she flipped through the first pages. The hush that followed was electric. Bradley's confident grin faltered. He leaned toward Gerald, whispering frantically, his hands gesturing wildly. I caught fragments of panic slipping from his lips. "She never told me." "How is this possible?" Patricia leaned closer to me, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "Watch carefully. This is where the tide turns." Judge Richardson read silently for a few moments, then spoke aloud. "This agreement is properly executed. Both parties signed with proper notarization and witness signatures. Financial disclosures are attached." Mr. Crawford waived his right to independent counsel. She paused, scanning another section. Clause 4A. All premarital assets remain separate property. Clause 4B. Any inheritance received during the marriage remains the separate property of the receiving party, provided it is not commingled with marital accounts. A gasp rippled through the gallery. One reporter scribbled furiously, while another mouthed the words, "Inheritance separate property," to his colleague. Bradley's face went from red to pale in a matter of seconds. He stood abruptly, his voice cracking. "Your Honor, this is some kind of trick. I don't remember signing that. Judith made it sound like nothing, just a romantic formality." The judge's gavel cracked against the bench. "Mr. Crawford, you will remain seated or be held in contempt. Your attorney may review the document through proper channels." Gerald approached the bench, his steps hesitant, and began flipping through the agreement. His expression grew paler with every page. When he returned to the table, Bradley grabbed his arm, demanding answers, but Gerald only shook his head grimly. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted like a storm rolling in. Where moments ago Bradley had been the predator, now he looked cornered, desperate, exposed. Patricia seized the moment. "Your Honor, this agreement was not only valid but meticulously drafted to protect Mrs. Crawford's business premarital assets and any inheritance. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mrs. Crawford has kept her inheritance in separate accounts, never commingled precisely as outlined in Clause 4B. The petitioner's claims, therefore, are without merit." Judge Richardson nodded thoughtfully, flipping another page. "Indeed, this agreement is one of the most comprehensive I've reviewed in 23 years on the bench." The whispers in the gallery swelled again. People leaning forward, eyes fixed on Bradley, as if waiting for the next act of his humiliation. Bradley buried his face in his hands, then slammed a fist onto the table. "She trapped me," he shouted. "She made me think we were partners." The judge's gavel thundered again. "Mr. Crawford, this is a court of law, not a theater. Control yourself or you will be removed." I sat still, my heartbeat steady now. For months I had lived under the weight of his manipulation, but here in this moment the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. It was written on every page the judge held in her hands. Bradley thought he had orchestrated the perfect heist. Instead, he had walked straight into a trap he had signed with his own flourish of a pen. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Because justice, as I was learning, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through ink on paper, waiting patiently for the right moment to strike. The air inside the courtroom was so still, it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Judge Richardson adjusted her glasses one final time and placed the prenuptial agreement neatly on the bench. Her gaze swept from Bradley's pale, clammy face to mine, calm and steady, before she spoke. "This court has reviewed the evidence. The prenuptial agreement presented is valid, comprehensive, and legally binding. Therefore, Mr. Crawford has no claim to Mrs. Crawford's premarital assets, her business holdings, or the inheritance received during this marriage." The words struck Bradley like a physical blow. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His golden hair, once meticulously styled, now clung damply to his forehead. The smug man who had walked into this courtroom like he owned the place now looked small, shrunken by the truth. Judge Richardson wasn't finished. She lifted a second folder Patricia had provided earlier. Furthermore, Section 7 of the agreement stipulates that debts incurred individually by either party remain solely the responsibility of that party. Mrs. Crawford, does your counsel have documentation of debts accumulated by Mr. Crawford during this marriage? Patricia stood with quiet confidence. Yes, Your Honor. Exhibit C contains credit card statements, the vehicle loan receipts from the failed restaurant investment, and records of country club membership dues. These debts total approximately $87,000, all in Mr. Crawford's name. The bailiff carried the folder forward. Judge Richardson examined the pages, nodding as she read. Then she looked directly at Bradley, her tone sharper than steel. Mr. Crawford, not only are you entitled to nothing from your wife's inheritance or business, but you remain personally responsible for $87,000 in debt, debts you alone incurred. This court will not transfer those obligations to Mrs. Crawford. Gasps erupted in the gallery. A woman in the second row stifled a laugh. A reporter whispered bankruptcy as his pen scratched furiously across the page. Even the bailiff's jaw twitched, as if he were suppressing a smirk. Bradley shot to his feet, his voice breaking. This isn't fair. 5 years of marriage has to count for something. I gave her everything, my support, my time, my love. Judge Richardson's gavel cracked like thunder. Sit down, Mr. Crawford. What you gave was reckless spending deception and an attempt to defraud your wife. What counts in this courtroom is the law. And the law is clear. He sank back into his chair, trembling, his once confident posture reduced to a slump. His attorney avoided his eyes, shuffling papers pointlessly, knowing there was no escape. The judge continued, her voice carrying finality. This court hereby grants the divorce petition filed by Mrs. Crawford. No marital assets shall be transferred. All debts incurred by Mr. Crawford remain his sole responsibility. This case is adjourned. The gavel fell again, echoing through the chamber like a coffin lid closing. For a heartbeat, silence lingered. Then the room erupted in whispers and murmurs. Reporters scribbled with renewed frenzy. Spectators leaned toward each other, trading gleeful remarks. He thought he'd get millions and ended up with nothing, one man muttered. Poetic justice, another woman whispered with a smile. I sat perfectly still, letting the moment wash over me. Bradley's shoulders sagged, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted toward me, desperate pleading, but there was no sympathy left in me, only clarity. Patricia touched my arm gently. It's done, she whispered. As I stood, flashes from cameras lit up the courtroom. Journalists called out questions, their voices rising above the din. Mrs. Crawford, how does it feel to win? Do you have a message for women watching this case? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken louder than anything I could say. Behind me, Bradley muttered under his breath, This can't be happening. It's not over. But it was. Because sometimes justice doesn't just punish, it humiliates. And in that room, with his debts piled high and his reputation in ruins, Bradley Crawford learned the most expensive lesson of his life: never underestimate the fine print. When the gavel came down for the final time, something inside me shifted. For months, maybe even years, I had carried the crushing weight of Bradley's manipulation, the constant fear that everything my grandmother built and entrusted to me could vanish in a single courtroom ruling. But as Judge Richardson's words echoed, "You are entitled to nothing," the burden lifted. The air felt lighter, the light filtering through the high windows brighter. Bradley slumped in his chair, his hands gripping his face, a broken man surrounded by whispers and camera flashes. I didn't celebrate out loud. I didn't need to. Justice had spoken, and it spoke with clarity, sharper than any revenge I could have imagined. Walking out of the courthouse, Patricia by my side, I thought of my grandmother. She had warned me long ago that money doesn't change people, it reveals them. Bradley had been revealed. All his charm, his golden smile, his expensive suits, none of it could mask the rot beneath. And in that moment, I realized the true gift my grandmother had left me was not just her estate, but the wisdom to protect it, The Bible says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." 1 Timothy 6:10. Bradley embodied that truth. His greed blinded him, convincing him he could gamble away his integrity and somehow still walk away victorious. But as another verse reminds us, whoever sows injustice reaps calamity. Proverbs 22:8. He sowed deceit, manipulation, and arrogance, and in return he reaped nothing but debt, disgrace, and a ruined reputation. Western wisdom echoes the same warning. Pride goes before a fall. I will never forget the way Bradley strutted into court that morning, basking in attention, convinced the world belonged to him. Hours later, he walked out with nothing but humiliation. That is what pride does. It builds men up only so they can crash harder. And if there is one detail that seals this lesson, it's the prenup itself. He signed it without care, joking that love didn't need fine print. But as the proverb says, the devil is in the details. And that single overlooked detail became the instrument of his downfall. In the weeks that followed, his spiral was swift and public. The country club revoked his membership when dues went unpaid. The luxury car was repossessed. The failed restaurant venture left creditors knocking at his door. Within 6 months, the bankruptcy court consumed what little he had left. Even the social circles he once flaunted abandoned him. His name became a cautionary whisper. Don't be another Bradley Crawford. As for me, I didn't waste my victory. Using part of my inheritance, I established the Crawford Foundation, a legal aid fund, to help women secure prenuptial agreements and defend themselves in divorce battles. My grandmother had protected me through foresight, and I wanted that protection to extend to others. No woman should ever sit in a courtroom fearing that the person she loved most would strip her of everything she built. I share my story now not to bask in revenge, but to remind anyone listening that truth has power, preparation has value, and greed always collapses on itself. This isn't just one woman's tale, it's part of a larger tapestry we call true revenge stories. The kind that prove life's most poetic justice often doesn't come from shouting or fighting back in anger, but from standing firm, trusting in the truth, and letting arrogance undo itself. So, to those watching from Maine to Manila, from Lagos to London, from Perth to Pennsylvania, I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have seen the warning signs sooner? Would you have believed the sweet words? Or would you have insisted on the fine print? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, because your perspective matters. Stories like this remind us we are connected across oceans and cultures by shared lessons about trust, betrayal, and justice. Remember, this money may test people, but it never lies about their character. Greed will always reveal itself. Pride will always invite a fall, and those who sow deceit will always harvest ruin. Bradley once believed he was the clever one, that he could outplay me, outsmart the law, outmaneuver the truth. But in the end, he was undone by his own arrogance, and I quietly, patiently, faithfully walked out free, my dignity intact, my grandmother's legacy secure. This is not just my story. It's a reminder for anyone who has been betrayed, manipulated, or underestimated. Stand firm, prepare wisely. Believe that justice, whether in the eyes of men or in the eyes of God, will come. Because at the end of the day, as Scripture and Proverb both teach us, you reap what you sow. And Bradley reaped exactly what he planted.